The wind screamed down from the mountains like it had a score to settle. Snow fell sideways in thick sheets, swallowing the world in white. Emergency lights pulsed against the storm, casting eerie halos on the tarmac. Inside the hangar, voices clashed. The flight team argued over charts, radar, fuel load, and survival odds. Every conversation ended the same way. Too risky, too late, no go. The call had come in 10 minutes ago. 30 vehicles tangled across Logan Pass. 6 critical patients. 2 of them were kids. The roads were sealed in ice and the clock was bleeding minutes. Outside, the helicopter sat ready. Blades silent. Engines cold. A bird caged by fear, waiting for someone reckless enough or brave enough to fly it. Then she appeared. No announcement. No rallying cry. Just the slow crunch of boots over frozen gravel as she stepped out of the shadows. She moved like someone who had already made the decision hours ago. Her name was Charlie Dawson. Everyone at the center knew her as the mechanic with oil under her nails and too much quiet in her eyes. She was the one who showed up early, stayed late, and rarely spoke unless something needed fixing. But tonight she wasn't walking like a mechanic. She wore her coveralls, same as always. Grease stains on her sleeves, collar turned up against the wind. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot. Snow clung to her shoulders, but her hands didn't shake. She stopped just short of the chopper, reached into her pocket, and pulled out something small. The badge was old, brass dulled with time. She pinned it to her chest like it belonged there, like it always had. Someone in the hangar laughed, nervous. Another whispered her name, half question, half disbelief, but she didn't hear them. Or maybe she just didn't care. She laid a gloved hand on the aircraft's frame, fingers tracing the metal like she was greeting an old friend. Then she looked up at the sky, into the heart of the storm. They grounded me years ago, but tonight I fly. And with that, Charlie climbed into the pilot's seat. Part 1. Introducing Charlie Dawson. Charlie Dawson lived in a weathered cabin tucked between pine trees at the edge of town. Her place wasn't big, but it was clean and steady like her. A porch swing creaked when the wind picked up and tools hung in neat rows on the walls inside. At 35, Charlie moved with the quiet certainty of someone who knew her hands could solve just about any mechanical problem. She wore denim every day and didn't care much if the cuffs were frayed or the knees were stained. In town, folks knew her by her truck and the way she could coax an engine back to life with a wrench and a listen. No one asked where she came from, and she didn't volunteer much. Most days she kept her eyes down and her focus on work. The gas station guys called her the machine whisperer, but always with a smile like they meant it kindly. Her garage sat just off the main road, a squat metal building with a battered sign that read, Dawson Repair. The O had faded completely, but she never replaced it. Inside, the place smelled like motor oil and pine sawdust. Every bolt had a home. Every socket wrench was exactly where she'd left it the night before. At closing time, Charlie packed up slow. She wiped her hands, locked the doors, and drove home with the radio low. Sometimes it was jazz, sometimes old military bands, always instrumental, never lyrics. Back at the cabin, she'd light the small wood stove and heat up a tin of stew or scrambled eggs. Her bookshelf was lined with thick manuals, some about aviation, others about weather patterns, engine theory, and rescue logistics. She read a few pages each night, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with a mug of tea cooling beside her. There was a drawer by her bed where she kept old things she didn't talk about, dog tags that weren't hers, a photo of a helicopter barely visible through a jungle haze, and a pilot badge faded from years of worry between her fingers. Some nights she still traced the edges of it in the dark. Charlie wasn't lonely, but she lived alone. There was a difference. She liked the quiet, the routine. She liked not having to explain why she stopped and looked up every time she heard a rotor cut the air overhead. In town, people waved. They liked her, respected her, but they didn't really see her. Not the part that still lit up at the thought of liftoff, of terrain maps, of emergency extractions and flight paths no one else dared try. That part stayed hidden. She didn't keep mirrors around the house, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't need to see herself to know who she was. The only reflection that mattered was in the finish of a rotor blade spinning clean and true. When she spoke, it was soft-clipped, only what was needed. She'd smile if someone made a joke, even laugh if it was good. But you could tell her mind was always somewhere between throttle pressure and altitude. Nobody asked why she never left town. She had a good thing going, a good shop, good tools, no trouble. But there was a restlessness just under the surface. It showed up in the way she lingered near the radio scanner late at night, in the way she'd walk down to the hangar when no one was around just to stand near the helicopters parked in silence. There were dreams she had stopped saying out loud years ago, dreams that were grounded for good, or so she thought, until the storm came, until everything quiet and buried started to pull toward the surface again. Part 2. The Cold Glass Tower. Sub. Part 2.1. Not the right kind of resume. The lobby at St. Evans Medical Center looked like something out of a tech commercial. Chrome fixtures, backlit glass walls, and the faint scent of eucalyptus drifted from vents that probably cost more than Charlie's truck. Everyone inside moved like they'd rehearsed it. Polished shoes, tapping softly over marble floors, voices trimmed down to whispers. Charlie stood near the front desk, hands tucked into the sides of her clean work jeans. She'd traded her coveralls for a plain blue button-down sleeves rolled just enough to keep the grease stains from showing. Her boots were scuffed but solid, the kind meant to walk through slush, not glide across tile. A receptionist in a fitted blazer asked if she had an appointment without looking up. Charlie nodded. Once gave her name and was directed to the executive wing. The elevator ride was silent. She checked her reflection in the brushed metal paneling and didn't flinch. The top floor smelled sharper, like sanitizer and air freshener trying to outcompete each other. She stepped into Dr. Wesley Crane's office 5 minutes early. He didn't seem to notice. Crane didn't stand when she entered. He stayed behind his glass desk, fingers, steepled eyes scanning something on a screen. His hair was perfect, his tie expensive, his expression already set. He asked one question before flipping open her file. Montana State Technical College. He said it like it might be contagious. She nodded again, not offering more. He kept reading. No previous work in air medical transport. References include auto shops and agricultural contracts. He paused there, his smile slow and satisfied. We don't usually hire tractor mechanics. Charlie said nothing. She'd heard worse. She stared straight ahead, hands folded in her lap. Her resume lay between them like a joke only he found funny. Crane sighed, leaned back, and looked past her. We typically source from Stanford, MIT, Johns Hopkins. He tapped her file once, then closed it like swatting a fly. But our head technician took a job in Seattle, 2 weeks before launch. She waited. He scratched his jaw and finally said they'd bring her on under a temporary probation period. Maintenance only. Keep the aircraft functional. Stay out of the way. Charlie nodded once more and stood. He didn't offer a handshake. She didn't look for one. On the way out, the receptionist asked if she needed parking validated. Charlie shook her head and walked past the double doors into the wind, her boots leaving muddy outlines against the polished floor just behind her. Subpart 2.2. Invisible but essential. Charlie started every morning before the sun cleared the mountains. She walked the flight line in silence, clipboard in one hand, flashlight in the other, checking every bolt and fuel line with the focus of someone who still believed the small things could save lives. No one watched her work, but she logged every fix, every anomaly, and kept the aircraft ready for emergencies that hadn't happened yet. Chief Pilot Dean Marshall barely nodded when she passed him. He'd glance up just long enough to confirm she was still there, then return to conversations with real professionals. Nurse Ivy Chambers walked right by Charlie in the hangar without a word, her stethoscope swinging like a badge. Charlie offered suggestions when she noticed inefficiencies in cold weather fuel mixes or rotor wear during hover drills. The first time, Marshall cut her off mid-sentence with a smirk and said, "Stick to fixing bolts, sweetheart." After that, she wrote her notes in the margins of maintenance logs and didn't expect anyone to read them. At a team meeting, Marshall presented a new flight protocol to applause. It was hers word for word, lifted from the paper she'd left on his desk the week before. No one knew. She didn't say anything. When the news crew came to film a feature on the rescue team, they asked Charlie to stand near the aircraft. She answered one question on camera, something simple about maintenance schedules. The footage never aired. Instead, viewers saw Dean pointing at the engine bay, explaining preventative systems she had designed. No one thanked her, but the machines ran perfectly. That was enough, at least for now. Charlie wiped her hands clean, marked another task complete, and headed back to her corner of the hangar where no one interrupted and no one listened. Part 3. The Dream and the Fall. Sub-Part 3.1. Title: The Dream That Took Flight. See, Charlie was 28 when she walked through the gates at Colorado Springs. The sun was sharp off the concrete, the air thinner than back home, and every step felt like it belonged to someone chasing a legacy. She carried a duffel bag, a pair of worn gloves, and the last letter her father ever wrote, tucked inside a weathered flight manual. Out of 200 cadets, only 7 were women. Most of them had private flight hours, long resumes, polished answers. Charlie had nothing but natural instinct, a sharp mind, and a determination that made her instructors take notice fast. She didn't out-talk anyone. She outflew them. The first time she touched the controls, something clicked. She didn't move the aircraft. She listened to it, adjusted with such precision and calm that her trainer leaned forward, watching her hands like they were writing code he didn't understand. The report the next day just said, "Born pilot." She never sought praise, but it found her. Her timing during descent drills, her efficiency during hydraulic emergency simulations. The instructors stopped double-checking her numbers. They started using them. Charlie never forgot why she was there. Her father's photo stayed taped to the inside of her locker helmet tucked just beneath it. He died during a medevac mission in the Philippines when she was 16. Brought out 2 wounded men before his engine gave up over the jungle. They buried what was left with honors. She hadn't cried at the funeral. She'd looked up instead, followed the sound of helicopters overhead until they disappeared. Every hour in the simulator was a conversation with him. Every checklist she ran felt like one more step in his shadow. He had taught her the basics back home in a beat-up crop duster, her feet barely reaching the pedals. Now she was learning angles of descent and lift-torque ratios. But the feeling was the same. The sky still asked the same question. "Do you belong up here?" And Charlie answered yes. Other cadets whispered about quotas and luck, about her not fitting in, but she didn't let it touch her. She stayed late. Ran drills twice, memorized manuals while others slept. She didn't want to be the best woman in the class. She wanted to be the best pilot. And for a while, she was. Subpart 3.2, The Fall from the Skies. It happened during her final evaluation flight. Charlie had double-checked everything as always. Something felt off in the hydraulics, a hesitation she couldn't quite name, but the tower cleared her anyway. 3 minutes into the climb, the failure hit hard. The controls jerked and alarms screamed through the cockpit. She fought the descent with everything she had, landing rough but alive. The damage was minimal. No injuries. But within hours, the story had changed. Her commanding officer pulled her into a quiet office and laid down the new version. Faulty pre-flight inspection. Pilot error. Training terminated. Charlie didn't understand at first. She kept thinking someone would fix it, that the truth would surface. But no one came forward. The cadet who trained beneath her, whose scores always sat behind hers, kept his mouth shut and his record clean. His father wore stars on his shoulders and called in favors from Washington. Within a day, all talk of sabotage disappeared. The maintenance log vanished from the records. Her own report was filed under procedural misstep. Her instructor, the one who used to praise her instincts, wouldn't meet her eyes. When she asked him why, he just said, "Maybe some people weren't meant to fly." Then he signed the discharge paperwork and turned away. They didn't take her to the gate in uniform. They handed her a sealed envelope, a silent ride to the base exit, and nothing more. No medal, no goodbye. Just a stamp on her file and silence. That night, alone in a motel room 2 towns over, she pulled the pilot badge from her pocket. It still smelled like aviation grease. She turned it over in her hand until her fingers went numb. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just stared at the wings and wondered how something that once meant everything could now feel like nothing. Then she tucked it into her bag, not ready to let it go, even if she'd never wear it again. Part 4. Treated like less. Charlie kept her head down and her hands busy. The days bled together in grease and checklists. Every bolt and fuel line tended to with the care of someone who still believed details could matter. She logged everything quietly, building a record no one else bothered to read. One afternoon, she overheard a conversation about the previous mechanic. He had fewer certifications than she did and had left after only 6 months. His salary was listed on a payroll file someone left open on a shared computer. It was nearly 40% higher than hers. She closed the file without a word. No one asked why her jaw tightened that day or why her hands moved faster on the next inspection. She didn't bring it up. She knew what it would sound like. Complaining, ungrateful, emotional. Instead, she submitted a fuel optimization report. It outlined ways to improve cold weather performance and reduce load strain during high-altitude missions. A week later, the chief pilot presented it during a morning meeting. Her name wasn't mentioned. Another time, she flagged a discrepancy in the emergency landing protocol. Her notes detailed exactly where the manual could fail in sub-zero crosswinds. The correction showed up in the updated guidelines under the flight team's signature. When the hospital hosted its annual charity gala, Charlie was asked to attend. Not as part of the flight team, but to show donors how the center supported local hires. She wore her one good dress, pressed the collar flat, and stood near the back of the ballroom with a name tag that read, "Maintenance Support." Dr. Crane introduced her to a group of sponsors as a great example of community inclusion. The way he said it made her feel like a good deed instead of a teammate. She smiled anyway, nodded once, then stepped aside as he posed for photos with the pilot crew in matching uniforms. The next morning, a local news crew came by for a feature segment. They filmed her checking rotor systems, asked her one question about safety. She answered in exactly 12 words. When the footage aired that night, the segment opened with the pilot speaking confidently in front of the aircraft, explaining the very systems she had described. Her name didn't make the screen. Neither did her voice. Charlie watched the clip from the break room alone. The sound echoed off the tile. She didn't flinch. She finished her coffee and went back to the hangar. The break came slowly. Not loud, not all at once. It came in the silence of too many ignored reports, too many smirks, too many moments when she was invisible except when something broke. That night, after the others had gone home, she stayed behind. The lights in the hangar buzzed above her. The smell of hydraulic fluid lingered in the air, sharp and familiar. Her hands were still dirty from the day's work. She sat at the old metal desk in the back corner, pulled out a blank piece of paper, and began to write. The words didn't come fast. She paused between sentences, erased whole lines, started over. She didn't want to quit. She just couldn't stay like this. Outside, the wind picked up. She folded the paper in half, tucked it in her jacket, and stared at the helicopter resting in the bay. All that work, all that care, and no one knew who kept it alive. She looked down at her hands. They were still steady, still strong, but something in her chest felt tired in a way she hadn't felt since the day she left Colorado Springs. Part 5. The Storm. Only She Could Fly Sub. Part 5.1. 1. When No One Else Will Fly. The call came in just after sunset. A 30-car pileup on Logan Pass, whiteout conditions, 6 patients, critical 2 of them kids. Ground teams were stuck behind jackknifed semis and frozen drifts, and the temperature was dropping fast. Inside, the emergency wing chaos spilled through the halls. Nurses barked orders, trauma bays filled with motion, and the radios crackled with voices rising above static. The chief pilot was unreachable. Backup flyers were grounded miles away, unable to get airborne through the storm. Someone said the word impossible. Someone else said the word bodies. No one said volunteer. Charlie heard the call from the far end of the corridor, leaning against a utility door with her badge clipped to the hem of her shirt. She didn't rush. She didn't ask permission. She turned and walked straight toward the hangar, each step quiet and sure. The snow slammed against the windows like it was trying to get in. The hangar lights flickered as she entered. The helicopter sat in the bay, patient, silent, waiting. She moved straight to the locker where she kept the old things. Inside was the badge. It was still dull, the edges worn smooth from years in her pocket. Her fingers found it without looking. She pinned it to her chest and let the weight of it settle. The others found her as she stepped out onto the floor. Dr. Crane's voice cut across the room. "What do you think you're doing?" Charlie looked him in the eye and for the first time didn't look away. She said she was flying the bird. Said she had over 2,000 logged hours top marks in mountain extraction emergency whiteout response flight scores that once broke Academy records. Someone laughed under their breath. Another said that was 10 years ago. She stood there with the wind rattling the windows behind her. "I didn't quit. They took it from me. But not tonight." Silence followed, deep and uncertain. One paramedic asked if she was certified. Charlie pulled out the weathered card from her wallet and held it steady in the light. Her name was still there. Her wings still listed. Crane started to object, but no one backed him. Even the nurse who had rolled her eyes for months didn't speak. Charlie turned and climbed into the pilot seat. Her hands slid across the controls like they had never left. The engine fired. The blades began to spin. The wind screamed louder outside, but inside the hangar nothing moved except the helicopter coming back to life. Subpart 5.2 Through the Eye of the Storm. The helicopter rose into the storm like it belonged there. Snow swirled against the windshield in angry bursts, and the wind fought her every inch of the climb. Charlie's hands stayed steady on the controls, her eyes locked on the horizon she could barely see. The paramedics sat behind her, strapped in and silent. One of them leaned forward just enough to watch her hands work. She adjusted for wind shear before the sensors caught it, trimmed the rotors with the ease of muscle memory. Ice crusted the outer frame. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Still, she kept climbing the aircraft, moving as if it were reading her thoughts. A warning light blinked for the auxiliary fuel line, but she reached down and rerouted the feed without pausing. The hum evened out. Below them, the crash site appeared like a broken toy box spilled across the pass. Cars lay twisted and half buried in drifts. Red and blue emergency lights flickered through the fog. The only flat place was a ledge carved into the mountainside, barely wide enough to land a picnic table. Charlie didn't land. She hovered, skids inches from the rock body, motionless, breath slow and controlled. The wind slammed into them like a freight train, but she held the position, adjusting pitch and throttle by instinct. The paramedics moved fast, dropping into the snow and pulling victims into stretchers. Charlie never looked away from the gauges. Her voice stayed calm through the comms, calling out wind angles and clearance time like she had done it 100 times before. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The rotors strained as the snow thickened, and another light lit red across the dash. The main engine temp climbed past safe range. Charlie shifted power, balanced between backup systems, and coaxed the aircraft into holding just a little longer. When the crew returned, 6 patients were loaded in, 2 of them small enough to disappear under blankets. Charlie gave the final clearance and eased the helicopter into forward motion, slipping away from the ledge with no margin left to spare. The descent was harder. Every gust tried to shove them sideways. She talked softly to the machine hands, never leaving the controls. The aircraft responded like it remembered her, like it trusted her to bring it home. She opened the radio channel, voice level and low. 6 patients, 2 pediatric traumas, 7 minutes out. The line went quiet after that. No one needed to say anything. They just listened to her guide the helicopter through the white all the way back to the light. The helicopter had barely cooled when the board members arrived. Suits, scarves, and carefully practiced smiles gathered at the edge of the landing pad. Dr. Crane stood stiff beside them, hands clasped, trying to look composed in the wake of what everyone now knew. They offered her the role of chief pilot right there on the tarmac, said it was immediate, said her performance was historic. She listened without interrupting. Then she shook her head once and said she was a mechanic. That was what they hired her for. No one responded at first. A few shifted, unsure what to say. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind still whispered around the hospital walls. Charlie glanced up at the sky, then down at the skids already half buried in fresh powder. Across the lot, a young woman stood watching, paramedic trainee. Her hands were clenched around her jacket sleeves, eyes wide, hopeful. Charlie saw it in a second. The same hunger, the same fire she used to carry in her own bones before they buried it under silence and grit. She walked over slowly, reached into her jacket pocket. The badge was still pinned there, dull but steady. She unhooked it and held it out. The girl looked startled but didn't move. Charlie placed it gently on her chest, fingers resting there for a breath. Don't let anyone tell you what storms you can't fly through. Then she turned and walked past the line of cameras, past the doctors, past Crane's awkward half-step toward her. No one stopped her this time. They didn't need to. Some watched her leave with confusion, others with guilt. But the silence that followed her wasn't about dismissal anymore. It was the quiet people give to something they finally understand, something they know they didn't deserve. The garage hadn't changed much. The sign still leaned slightly to the left, the gravel still crunched under tires, and the smell of oil and pine wood lingered in the air. But inside, something new had taken shape. A second bay now held a sleek rescue chopper recently delivered and tuned by Charlie's own hands. The tools on the bench were cleaner, manuals stacked higher. There were notes in her handwriting taped to the walls outlining flight checks and emergency protocols written with quiet precision. An anonymous donor had helped fund the start of the new service. No speeches, no headlines, just a transfer, a thank you, and a letter that ended with the words, "Keep doing what they wouldn't let you." Charlie took it and got to work. The morning was clear when the family arrived. A teenage boy had fallen while hiking near a ridge. His ankle was broken, and the old dirt road would take over 2 hours by ambulance. The father paced while his wife looked at the sky and whispered a quiet prayer. Charlie listened, nodded once, then walked toward the aircraft. Her flight jacket hung by the door, soft with wear. She pulled it on without hesitation. Inside the cockpit, the controls felt familiar again. Calm. Above the dashboard, framed in simple pine, was her father's logbook. It was open to the page about the storm in Vietnam. The ink had faded a little, but the final lines still held steady. She checked the instruments, flipped the switches in order, and felt the machine respond beneath her fingertips. Through the windshield, the sky stretched wide and empty, waiting. Some storms you fly through, others you simply outlast. Her voice was low as she said it. Not for anyone else, just for herself. Then the blades spun up, steady and strong, carrying her forward once more.